Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what it feels like when the predator becomes the prey? Today, I'm going to share with you a story unlike any other. A tale where a notorious poacher, a man who spent years hunting wolves, suddenly found himself trapped in the very game he thought he controlled. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support wolf conservation, because the story you're about to hear proves that nature has its own justice. It begins deep in the forests of Montana, where the shadows run longer than the daylight, and silence itself seems alive. One man enters that silence with a rifle slung over his shoulder and a cruel confidence in his stride. He has set his traps the night before, iron jaws hidden beneath leaves, and snow meant to snap shut on legs, tearing muscle and bone. To him, it's routine. Wolves are trophies, pelts to sell teeth to keep. But the morning brings something he never expected. When he returns to check his traps, the first one is mangled, snapped open, twisted out of shape, as if something stronger than steel had forced it apart. The second is gone entirely, only claw marks carved into the dirt where it once lay. The third, the fourth, all destroyed. Each site carries the same signature deep gouges in the earth, the heavy mark of paws, tufts of gray fur clinging to broken metal. The man kneels, runs his hand along one shattered trap and frowns. His breath clouds in the cold air. He mutters to himself, "Wolves don't do this." Yet the evidence is undeniable. One by one, his carefully placed snares have been torn apart, not avoided, not bypassed, destroyed. As the forest swallows the sound of his boots, he begins to notice other details. Tracks, large, deliberate circling. The snow shows patterns he doesn't like. They aren't scattered trails of a wandering pack. They are precise, surrounding him in ways only hunters would recognize. At first, he laughs it off. He's the one with the gun after all. He's the one who has claimed dozens of pelts. What can wolves possibly do against a man with weapons? But the forest has gone quiet. No birds, no squirrels, only the crunch of his own steps. Then, far off, a howl, low, drawn out, echoing between the pines. Another joins it, then another, until the air itself vibrates with sound rolling in from every direction. He tightens his grip on the rifle. Sweat gathers under his collar despite the cold. For the first time in years, he feels what his prey must have felt, watched, surrounded, powerless. And that's when it hits him. The wolves aren't running from him. They're driving him deeper into the forest, herding him, turning his hunt into theirs. To understand what truly unfolded in that forest, we need to step back. We need to know the man who walked into those shadows and the world of wolves he dared to challenge. Because no story is ever just about a single night. It's about the years that shape the predator and the centuries that shape the wild. His name was Richard Calloway, though in hunting circles he was known simply as Rick. In small Montana towns scattered along the Yellowstone Range, his name carried both fear and admiration. Fear because Rick was ruthless. Admiration because he always came back with something strapped to the bed of his pickup, deer, elk, cougar, and more than once, wolves. For Rick, the forest was not a place of wonder. It was a marketplace. Every pelt was cash, every set of antlers a trophy someone would pay for. He was a man carved from hard times, laid off from a mill when he was only 20, drifting into odd jobs that never lasted. Hunting, trapping, selling furs, these became his livelihood. Over time, the business hardened into obsession. Wolves especially became his target. To him, they weren't animals to respect. They were rivals, competitors, stealing the elk he wanted for himself. But while Rick measured wolves in dollars, biologists measured them in something else: survival. Montana's wolf packs had been slowly rebuilding after decades of extermination. Once nearly wiped out, wolves had returned, reclaiming their ancestral forests. Packs of 6, 8, sometimes 12 roamed valleys and ridges, keeping herds in check, restoring balance to the ecosystem. Where Rick saw profit, scientists saw a fragile miracle of recovery. And then there was the forest itself. Imagine vast stretches of evergreens, their trunks blackened by old fires, their crowns heavy with snow. Imagine rivers cutting through canyons, where ice clings to the stone and wind sings through the branches. This was no tame land. It was wilderness, raw, unforgiving, and deeply alive. Every step deeper meant surrendering control, whether a man admitted it or not. Rick never admitted it. He considered the woods his domain, a chessboard where he could place traps and always expect a result. But wolves do not play by human rules. Wolves are strategists of their own. A pack is not just a group of animals. It is a living, breathing network of minds. Each wolf senses the other's moves. Each responds to the tiniest signal, a twitch of ears, a shift of weight, a glance. Together, they are not just predators, they are tacticians. On that particular winter, food was scarce. Snow had fallen heavier than usual. Elk had migrated lower, leaving the higher ridges empty. Packs traveled farther, risked more. They were hungry, but they were also united. And hunger sharpens instinct. Locals had whispered about one pack in particular, larger than most, rumored to be led by a black-furred alpha male with scars across his muzzle. Hunters claimed his howl carried farther deeper than any other wolf's. Biologists called him Shadow, though no one knew his exact age. He was legend more than data point, a creature spoken of in the same breath as fear. Rick scoffed at the stories. To him, wolves were flesh and fur, nothing more. Legends didn't scare him. Only empty traps did. Still, there were things even Rick could not ignore. Twice he had found his traps tampered with, not by humans, but by claws and teeth. Once he returned to discover a half-eaten deer he had left, as bait had been dragged away, tracks surrounding it in a perfect ring, as if the wolves had danced around his claim. Each time his temper grew hotter. Each time his determination to outsmart them deepened. That is what brought him back to the forest that morning, rifle heavy in his arms, heart light with the thought of victory. He would prove himself against Shadow's pack. He would break their legend just as he broke their bones. But what Rick didn't understand, and what few humans ever do, is that the forest remembers. Every tree scarred by axes, every river poisoned, every animal trapped or slain, these are written into the land's memory. And sometimes the land responds. Rick thought he was walking into another routine hunt. He thought he was the one writing the rules. But the forest had already chosen a different script. As he pressed deeper, following tracks that seemed almost too deliberate, the first real doubt began to take root. Were the wolves leading him? The paw prints didn't scatter randomly. They curved, circled, then disappeared only to reappear behind him. More than once, he felt the hairs on his neck rise, that primal alarm humans carry from when they too were prey. And then came the silence. The forest emptied of birdsong, of rustle of anything but his boots. Silence in nature is not absence. It is presence. It means every creature is holding its breath, waiting. It means something larger than you has entered the scene. Rick shifted his rifle, scanning the trees. He told himself he was in control, that he was the hunter. But deep down, he knew the balance was shifting. This was no longer just his story. It was the wolves. Every story has a moment when the balance shifts, when the hunter steps too far into the unknown and realizes there is no easy way back. For Rick Calloway, that moment came not with the snap of a trap, but with the sound of a howl that froze his blood. He had been following the tracks for hours. At first, they looked like ordinary wolf prints, wide pads, claws pressing deep into the snow. But the more he studied them, the stranger they seemed. They weren't scattered trails of animals searching for food. They were deliberate weaving in arcs, that seemed designed to pull him forward. Each time he thought he had reached the end, the prince reappeared, leading him deeper into the forest's heart. His breath hung thick in the air. The sun had begun its descent, the sky bruising purple and gray. Rick cursed under his breath. He should have turned back hours ago, but pride is a dangerous companion. He tightened his grip on the rifle. If the pack was here, he would prove his dominance once and for all. Then it happened. A low growl rolled across the clearing. Not loud, not close, but steady like a warning whispered by the trees. Rick froze. His eyes darted left, then right. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden among pines, a shape materialized. It was a wolf. Larger than any he had seen, its fur, black as midnight snow clinging to its muzzle. Eyes golden, unblinking. For a long breath, neither man nor beast moved. Rick raised his rifle. His hands were steady, his finger grazing the trigger. But before he could aim, another growl came from behind him. He spun, heart jolting. A second wolf, gray-coated, stood 10 yards away. Its posture was low shoulders, tight ears forward. Then came a third, to his left. Then a fourth to his right. One by one, shadows peeled themselves from the trees circling, forming a ring. Rick's chest pounded. Sweat pricked his spine despite the cold. He had faced wolves before, but never like this. Never this organized. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography. He barked a laugh, more to convince himself than anyone else. "All right," he muttered. "Come on then." He fired a shot into the air. The gunshot shattered, the silence echoed through the valley. Birds burst from the trees. For a moment, the wolves flinched. But they didn't flee. They held their ground. Slowly, deliberately, the black wolf stepped forward. Rick's throat tightened. His rifle trembled now, the confidence draining from his limbs. He aimed at the black wolf's chest, but something inside him wavered. The animal's eyes weren't wild with fear. They were steady, intelligent, ancient. The wolf stopped just outside of shooting range. Behind him, the others adjusted, forming a semicircle that pinned Rick to the center. He could feel their breath in the air, hear the crunch of their paws in snow. His mind scrambled for logic. Wolves don't act like this. They don't coordinate like soldiers. And yet here they were, every step in perfect unison. Rick fired again, this time into the snow at their feet. The bullet cracked ice, spraying shards. Still, the wolves didn't retreat. They simply closed the circle tighter. Then a howl broke the air. Long, mournful, but sharp with command. It came from the black wolf, his muzzle lifted to the sky. The sound pierced Rick's ears, reverberating in his chest. Immediately, the others answered one after another, their voices layering into a chilling chorus. Rick staggered back, rifle shaking. For the first time in years, he felt something deeper than fear. He felt judgment. Because in that moment, surrounded by glowing eyes and iron voices, Rick realized he wasn't the hunter anymore. He was prey. He backed up until his boot struck something solid. He glanced down and froze. It was one of his own traps, twisted and broken, dragged here deliberately. Around it, paw prints overlapped in deliberate patterns like signatures, as if the wolves had carried his weapon to him to show him, "We know what you did." Rick stumbled. His pulse hammered. The forest spun. He fired again, blindly, the bullet cracking bark off a pine. But when he looked up, the black wolf had moved. Closer now, only yards away, snow clinging to its fur like armor. Rick's voice cracked in the cold. "Stay back. Survival is never about who carries the sharpest weapon. It's about who adapts, who endures, who refuses to break when the wild presses in." For Rick Calloway, the days that followed his first encounter would strip away everything he thought he knew about control. The wolves did not attack. Not outright. That was the most terrifying part. They tested him, watched him, herded him. After the howls died, The pack melted into the trees as if swallowed by shadow. For a moment, Rick thought he had scared them off. He stumbled toward the ridge, clutching his rifle, muttering curses under his breath. But the silence followed him. Every step felt like it was being measured. By dusk, exhaustion gnawed at him. His canteen was half empty. His food, a few strips of jerky, wouldn't last long. He had planned for a day's work, not a siege. Snow fell heavier, cloaking the ground, erasing paths. The forest had turned into a labyrinth. That night, he built a fire. The flames flickered weakly against the wind, casting long shadows. He sat close, rifle across his knees, eyes darting into the dark. Then, he heard a crunch of snow, soft but deliberate. He whipped his head around. Two glowing eyes shimmered just beyond the firelight. A wolf stood there, silent, unmoving. Its breath steamed in the cold. Rick raised his gun finger on the trigger, but the wolf didn't lunge. It simply stared. Seconds stretched. Then, as quietly as it had come, it turned and vanished into the black. That was the game. Each time he thought he was safe, one appeared behind a tree on a ridge near the fire. Never too close, never attacking, just reminding him, "We're still here." Sleep became impossible. Every rustle jolted him awake. Every shadow felt alive. He began to mutter to himself, voice fraying. "They're not going to win. They're just animals. Just animals." But deep down, he no longer believed it. By the second day, hunger gnawed. He tried to set snares for rabbits, but the snow buried them. His hands, cracked and bleeding, shook as he tied the knots. Hours later, he returned to find the snares destroyed. Not just sprung, pulled apart, scattered, marked with fresh paw prints. The wolves were dismantling his survival piece by piece. Rick's fury boiled. He screamed into the trees, firing a shot into the empty air. "Come on, face me." His voice echoed and died. Only silence answered. Then faintly, a chorus of howls rose, mocking, deliberate, distant, yet everywhere. That night he dreamed of teeth in the dark. By the third day, his body began to fail. He moved slower, rifle heavier. Thoughts blurred. Snow clung to his coat. Ice stiffened his boots. He stumbled often, catching himself on trees. The forest no longer looked like a place he knew. It was endless, merciless. Still, the wolves did not kill him. They pushed him. When he veered toward the ridge that might lead out, they appeared blocking the way, growling low, until he turned back. When he strayed too far from the valley, they drove him down again, snapping branches in the shadows, letting him glimpse fangs before fading away. They were not hunting for food. They were teaching him. On the fourth night, something broke inside him. Curled by a dwindling fire, he whispered into the dark, "Why me? Why not just finish it?" His voice cracked. His pride, his cruelty, the image of the fearless hunter, all had been peeled away. What was left was just a man shaking, begging shadows for mercy. And that's when he noticed something strange. Across the firelight, a wolf appeared. Not the black alpha, but a smaller gray, its coat ragged, one ear torn. It limped, slightly scarred from old battles. Rick froze. The wolf didn't attack. It simply watched him, head tilted, ears twitching at his trembling breath. In that gaze, Rick saw no malice, only calculation, curiosity. He lowered his rifle. His hands shook, but he did it anyway. For the first time, he didn't reach for violence. He just sat there, staring back. Minutes passed. Finally, the wolf turned and padded away. Something shifted in Rick that night. He realized the wolves could have ended him at any moment, but they hadn't. They had chosen to keep him alive, to break him down slowly, forcing him to feel what his prey had always felt: fear, helplessness, vulnerability. By the fifth day, Rick was a shell of himself. His voice rasped from thirst. His legs buckled often. and still the wolves guided him deeper into the wilderness. It was no longer a hunt, it was a trial. One evening, as snow painted the trees silver under moonlight, the black wolf appeared again. Shadow, the alpha. He stood tall, his breath-steaming golden eyes fixed on Rick. Behind him, the pack fanned out silently, like ghosts forming ranks. Rick sank to his knees, rifle slipping from his numb fingers into the snow. His lips trembled. I get it," he whispered. "I'm not the hunter. Not anymore." For the first time, the black wolf stepped closer. His paws pressed into the snow with a steady rhythm, his gaze never leaving Rick. He stopped only feet away. Rick's heart hammered so loud, he thought the pack must hear it. The alpha leaned forward, lips curling but not in a snarl. In a silent declaration, "This is our world. You are only passing through." Then, with a single bark, he turned. The pack melted back into the trees. Rick sat in the snow breath, ragged, staring after them. For the first time in his life, he felt something he never thought possible: respect. But respect would not feed him, would not get him out alive. The struggle was far from over. Every story of survival has a moment where the true test arrives, not from the enemy you expect, but from the land itself. For Rick Calloway, that moment came on the 6th day, when the forest decided to reveal its rawest face. It began with the wind. At first, a whisper through the pines, then a moan, then a howl that rivaled even the wolves. Snow thickened, falling sideways, driven by gusts that cut like knives. Rick pulled his coat tighter, stumbling through drifts that climbed to his knees. He could no longer see the sky, only a white blur that swallowed the trees. A blizzard. He had survived countless winters, but never like this. Not without shelter, not without food, not with wolves shadowing his every step. His firewood was gone, his matches damp. He was one man against a storm that could bury him alive. By midday, the temperature plunged. Frost clung to his beard, his breath freezing before it left his lips. His hands turned numb stiff around the useless rifle. Every step was agony, his legs dragging, as though the snow itself wanted to claim him. Then he heard it, the sound of movement. Not the storm, not the creak of branches. Something heavier, deliberate, crashing through snow. He spun, blinking against the white. Shapes appeared dark against the storm, circling again. The wolves. For a heartbeat, fear surged. He thought they had chosen this moment to strike. But then he noticed something different. Their bodies were low, their heads against the wind. They weren't stalking him. They were bracing against the same storm. A crack split the air like thunder. Rick's head snapped up. Somewhere above, snow broke free, an avalanche roaring down the slope. He had wandered too close to the mountain's edge. Instinct took over. He ran, legs pumping, lungs burning. Behind him, snow thundered, trees snapping like twigs as the white wall descended. The earth itself seemed to shake. He stumbled, nearly fell, but forced himself forward. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw them, the wolves sprinting alongside him. Gray bodies blurred by the storm, the black alpha leading the charge. They weren't chasing him. They were fleeing the same death. For the first time, man and wolf ran as one. The avalanche crashed closer, swallowing the clearing. Rick dove behind a fallen log, throwing himself flat. The wolves scattered, vanishing into the blur. The roar drowned everything wind breath thought. Snow slammed past, choking, smothering, until finally silence fell again. Rick lay there, chest heaving, buried up to his shoulders. Slowly, he clawed his way free. His body screamed with pain, but he was alive. Somehow, against everything alive. He looked up and froze. Not 10 feet away, the black wolf stood atop the drift steam, curling from his muzzle. Golden eyes locked on Rick's. For a moment, The world was only the two of them, survivors of the storm, bound by the same trial. Rick's throat tightened. He whispered hoarsely, "You saved me." Because deep inside, he knew had the wolves not run, had their movement not spurred his instinct, he would have been swallowed whole. The wolf didn't move. He didn't snarl. He simply stared. Then turned, trotting down the slope, his pack falling in behind him. Rick sat, trembling, realization burning through his chest. These animals he had hunted for years, these creatures he had dismissed as mindless predators, had just shown him what no man ever had: mercy. But the storm was not done. As night fell, the wind rose again. Snow piled against his back, numbing his limbs. He knew he couldn't survive another night exposed. He staggered through the trees, desperate for shelter. His vision blurred, his knees buckling. Just as he thought his body would give, he stumbled into a hollow, an old den dug into the hillside, its entrance sheltered by roots and stone. He collapsed inside, curling into the darkness, gasping. The warmth was faint, but it was enough. He let his eyes close. When he opened them again, he wasn't alone. Two wolves stood at the entrance, their silhouettes framed by the storm. For a moment, panic surged, but they didn't enter. They simply watched. Guardians or judges, he couldn't tell. Their breath steamed ears, pricked eyes glowing. Then slowly, they stepped back into the night, leaving him. Rick lay trembling, heart pounding. He realized then that his survival was no longer in his own hands. The forest, the storm, the wolves, they had decided his fate. He was no longer a player, but a piece on their board. And yet, as the blizzard howled, he felt something strange. Not just fear, not just exhaustion, something deeper, a spark of respect. For the first time, he understood the wolves weren't his enemy. They were the forest's truth, the balance he had spent his life denying. By morning, the storm eased. The forest lay buried, silent, pristine. Rick emerged from the den, shivering, his body frail but alive. He stumbled through drifts, each step harder than the last. Then he heard it, a howl. Not distant, not threatening, steady, guiding. He followed. Through the white wasteland, he trudged after that voice. Cresting a ridge, he saw them, the pack silhouetted against the dawn, their fur glowing in the pale light. The black alpha raised his head, howling once more, then turned and trotted toward the valley. Rick sank to his knees, tears freezing on his cheeks. For the first time, he wasn't looking at trophies or rivals or monsters. He was looking at teachers, survivors. And he realized that if he made it out of the forest alive, his life would never be the same again. When Rick Calloway stumbled out of the Montana backcountry after nearly a week, he was not the same man who had entered. His steps were slower, his body gaunt, his eyes hollow. But even more changed was the fire inside him. What had once been pride now smoldered into something else entirely. Yet the wild had only given him one kind of judgment. The human world was waiting with another. News of his disappearance had spread through the small towns at the forest's edge. Locals had long known Rick as a poacher. Some cursed his name, others looked the other way, but everyone recognized him. When he staggered into a ranger station coat, torn face lined with frostbite, jaws dropped. "Rick Calloway," one ranger muttered. "We thought you were dead." Rick collapsed into a chair, too weak to speak. His rifle was gone, lost to the snow. His traps never recovered. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to show. But the questions began almost immediately. What were you doing out there? Why were you so deep in the restricted zone? Did you set traps again? Rick lowered his head. For once, he didn't have his usual smirk, his practiced excuses. He simply stared at his hands, still raw from the cold, and said nothing. The rangers pressed harder. Evidence had already been found: broken traps, disturbed ground, even tracks leading to illegal snares. Conservation officers had been investigating for weeks, waiting for proof. Now, with Rick's reappearance, the case was open. Outside the ranger station, word spread quickly. By nightfall, his name was on the lips of every neighbor, every shopkeeper, every rancher. To some, he was a cautionary tale, a man who thought himself above nature and paid the price. To others, he was a criminal who had finally been caught. The wolves were no longer just animals in this story, they had become symbols. Local newspapers ran headlines, "Poacher survives 5 days in wolf territory." Environmental groups seized the story as proof of nature's resilience. To them, Rick wasn't a survivor, he was the hunted, a warning to anyone who tried to exploit the wild. Rick's own family distanced themselves. His brother refused his calls. Old hunting buddies avoided his gaze. For the first time, he was truly alone. Investigators soon arrived. They photographed his injuries, cataloged the broken traps, and collected statements. Rick faced charges: illegal hunting, trespassing, in protected habitat animal cruelty. The penalties were steep fines, loss of hunting rights, even prison time. But Rick's mind wasn't on the charges. Each night when he closed his eyes, he heard the howls again. He saw golden eyes glowing through snow. He dreamed of the black wolf standing above him after the avalanche, a silhouette of judgment and mercy. At the hearings, conservationists testified. They spoke of wolf packs rebuilding the ecosystem, of the delicate balance Rick had tried to shatter. One biologist said, "Every wolf lost to a trap sets us back years, but sometimes nature enforces its own justice." This time, the hunter lived to tell the story. Rick himself said little. When asked why he was in the forest, he finally spoke, voice rough. "I thought I was in control. I wasn't." The courtroom fell silent. Outside, activists held signs, "Protect the wolves." Nature's justice is real. End poaching now. For years, wolves had been painted as villains in folklore, monsters in the dark. Now the narrative was shifting. They weren't beasts to be feared. They were guardians of balance, capable of humbling even the most arrogant human. Rick was sentenced to community service and heavy fines. He avoided prison perhaps only because the ordeal had already broken him. But his punishment was more than legal. His reputation was gone. His livelihood as a trapper ended. Doors closed. Conversations hushed when he entered a room. Yet strangely, Rick didn't fight it. The man who once strutted with trophies now walked with his head low. The wolves had stripped away his armor long before the court did. Still, one question lingered. Why had they spared him? Why had the pack, with every opportunity to kill, chosen instead to test him, to drive him to let him live? No one could answer. Not the rangers, not the biologists, not even Rick himself. But deep down, he carried a truth too heavy to share, that in those golden eyes he had seen not hatred, but judgment, and in that judgment he had seen himself. Every man who survives the wilderness walks out with a choice: to return unchanged, clinging to old ways, or to leave part of himself behind, allowing the wild to write a new chapter. For Rick Calloway, that choice came quietly, not in a courtroom, but in the solitude that followed. After his sentencing, Rick withdrew from town life. He sold his pickup, abandoned the shed where he had once skinned pelts, and moved into a small cabin near the river. He no longer carried a rifle. Instead, he carried silence. But silence does not erase memory. At night, he still dreamed of snow burying him alive, of glowing eyes circling the fire, of the black wolf standing above him as the avalanche roared. One evening, he walked the river's edge with nothing but a walking stick. Snowmelt roared past, carving whitewater through the canyon. Above the sound of rushing water, he heard it a howl. Low, steady, rolling across the valley. His breath caught. He froze every muscle taut as though the sound itself was a hand pressing against his chest. Then came another howl higher from farther off. Then another. The valley filled with voices. He closed his eyes. Instead of fear, he felt something different: recognition. Over the weeks that followed, Rick found himself drawn to the edge of the wilderness. He hiked farther each time, always careful, never carrying weapons. He saw tracks pressed into mud, tufts of fur snagged on branches. Once he found the remains of an elk cleanly stripped by teeth and shared by many. The signs were everywhere the pack was thriving. And then, one late afternoon, it happened. He reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The sun burned low, painting the snowfields orange. And there on the far slope, he saw them. Wolves. 7, maybe 8. Their coats shimmered in the dying light. They moved as one, flowing over the ridge like water. At their head, unmistakable, was the black wolf. Shadow. Rick's throat tightened. His knees weakened. Every instinct told him to back away. Yet he stayed rooted to the earth, unable to look anywhere else. The wolves paused on the slope. Shadow lifted his head. Their eyes met across the distance: man and beast, predator and prey, survivor and judge. Rick whispered, though no one could hear, "Thank you." And in that still moment, something extraordinary happened. Shadow turned his muzzle skyward and howled. The others joined a chorus that poured into the valley, ancient and unbroken. Rick stood trembling, tears freezing on his lashes as the sound wrapped around him like a cloak. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a farewell. For in that howl, Rick heard recognition. The pack knew him not as the poacher who once sought their lives, but as the man they had tested and spared. When the wolves moved on, disappearing into timberline, Rick remained alone on the ridge. He knew he would never see them so close again. But he also knew something else: they had given him more than mercy. They had given him a chance. From that day forward, Rick's decision was clear. He would never hunt again. Not wolves, not deer, not anything. Instead, he began to work with conservation groups quietly, at first, then openly. He used his own story, harsh, shameful, redemptive, as a warning to others who thought the forest could be conquered. "The wolves don't need us," he told a small gathering at a local school one evening. "But we need them. Without them, the land is empty. Without them, we forget who we are." The children listened wide-eyed. Some parents scoffed, unable to believe the change. But Rick didn't care. He had made his choice, and the wolves had already marked it. Because sometimes the greatest farewell is not spoken by human tongues. It is carried in the sound of a howl across the snow, reminding us that we are not the masters of the earth, but only guests who pass through. Stories like Rick Calloway's rarely end in neat circles. Survival changes a man, but transformation is not instant. It is slow, uneven, sometimes resisted. Yet, as the seasons turned, Rick's path revealed itself, shaped not by pride or profit, but by the echo of howls he would never forget. Months passed since his encounter with the pack. Rick's days grew quieter. He worked odd jobs around town, splitting firewood for neighbors, repairing fences, clearing brush. No longer the swaggering poacher, he moved with humility, eyes downcast, his once rough hands now steady with care. At first, people distrusted him. Some jeered, others whispered, "That's the man the wolves let live." But as time went on, his actions began to speak louder than his past. He donated his old traps to a sanctuary for educational displays. He volunteered on trail cleanups. When calves went missing from nearby ranches, Rick surprised everyone by advising ranchers on non-lethal deterrents instead of offering to hunt predators. Privately, he kept returning to the forest, never with a rifle. Sometimes with only binoculars, sometimes with nothing at all. He never sought to follow the wolves directly, He knew better than to intrude, but he listened. He learned the rhythms of their valleys, the patterns of elk herds, the timing of seasonal migrations. The man who once measured animals by their market value now found meaning in simply watching them move. One winter morning, as snow drifted down in lazy spirals, Rick spotted fresh paw prints along a ridge. They weren't scattered. They ran straight, purposeful, a line of travelers on ancient paths. He followed from a respectful distance until far off he saw them. The pack. Smaller than before, perhaps some had dispersed, but still strong. Shadow led them, black coat gleaming even beneath gray skies. Rick stood motionless, heart pounding. He raised no gun. He whispered only one word, alive. And that was enough. Back in town, Rick slowly built a reputation, not as a poacher, but as something unexpected, a reluctant educator. Wildlife officers, once his enemies, invited him to speak at meetings. Schools asked for his story. He stood awkwardly before audiences, rough voice cutting through silence. I thought I was untouchable. I thought wolves were just fur and teeth. But the forest proved me wrong. I became prey. And in that, I found the truth. His words carried weight not because they were polished, but because they were lived. Children leaned forward, listening as if to a campfire tale. Ranchers folded their arms, skeptical, but even they could not deny the change in his eyes. Rick never became a hero. He never wanted to. But he became something better, proof that even the hardest heart can be reshaped by the wild. And still, the wolves remained. Each spring, their howls drifted across the valley. Each autumn, their tracks threaded through frost. Rick never approached, never intruded. Yet sometimes in the stillness of dusk, he swore he felt them watching. Not with malice, not with threat, with memory. One evening, years after that fateful winter, Rick hiked to the same ridge where he had once seen the pack framed in orange light. The forest had changed. Trees, fallen rivers shifted, but the view was the same. He stood there until the sun slipped behind the peaks. And then, as shadows stretched long, it came a howl. Clear, resonant, ancient. He closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. Another voice joined, then another, until the valley trembled with song. Rick smiled. For once there was no fear, only reverence. He raised his face to the darkening sky and whispered, "I hear you." In that moment, he knew he was no longer the hunter. He was no longer even the hunted. He was simply a man who had been granted the rarest of gifts, a second chance. Every story leaves behind a lesson. Rick Calloway's tale was never just about one man or one pack of wolves. It was about the balance. We forget the arrogance we carry and the truth the wilderness always remembers. Rick entered the forest believing he was the master, armed with steel and pride. He left stripped of both, humbled by creatures he once hunted without mercy. Wolves showed him what no courtroom or fine could, that the roles of hunter and prey are not fixed. That arrogance blinds us, but respect can set us free. In the end, Rick's survival was not about bullets or traps. It was about listening, about seeing the intelligence in golden eyes, the unity in a pack's movements, the mercy in being spared when every instinct told him he should have been destroyed. Nature became his teacher, the wolves his unexpected guides. And this is the truth we must carry with us. Wolves are not monsters. They are not villains lurking in folklore. They are guardians of ecosystems, keystones of balance, survivors of persecution. When we kill them, we don't just silence their howls, we unravel the fabric of the wild itself. Rick's life after the encounter became a testament. He turned from poacher to witness, from destroyer to protector. His story proves that change is possible even for the hardest hearts. But his transformation came at a cost. fear, isolation, and the stripping away of everything he thought he knew. We don't have to wait for disaster to learn what Rick learned. We can choose now to respect, to protect, to stand for the wild before it teaches us the hard way. So when you hear a howl echoing across the night sky, remember this: it is not a threat. It is an ancient voice calling us back to humility, reminding us we are only one part of a larger story. Rick once said, "The wolves don't need us, but we need them," and he was right. Without them, the land is emptier. Without them, we are smaller.